Author Salman Rushdie is awake and speaking with investigators.
That's right. He was stabbed just before a lecture in Western New York last Friday. Rushdie has been a target of death threats since his 1988 novel, The Satanic Verses. Many Muslims call the book blasphemous. Iran has denied any responsibility for the stabbing. The U.S. State Department condemned the attack, but says it is waiting for the investigation to play out before commenting further.
For more, let's bring in Abbas Milani. He is the director of Iranian Studies at Stanford and a research fellow and co-director of the Iran Democracy Project at the Hoover Institution. Abbas, welcome. Back in 1989, Iran's leader issued a fatwa against Rushdie, calling for his death. Now, while that was decades ago, Friday's attack came as we learned about an Iranian operative's alleged involvement in an assassination plot against former National Security Advisor John Bolton. What kind of strain does this put on already strained U.S.-Iran relations?
I think it does put a serious strain. Both the fatwa, which has been continued, the Iranian supreme leader has been very clear that the fatwa is still effective. An Iranian institution directly controlled by Mr. Khamenei is offering $3.5 million to any terrorist that does the deed. So the Iranian regime bears responsibility. And aside from the Bolton event, this one, I think the West, the United States, Europe has to be concerned with the increasing belligerence of the Iranian regime in engaging in this kind of terrorist acts and threats.
And so how will this affect U.S. negotiations with Iran on any sort of nuclear deal? What is the status of those talks?
The status of those talks are ambiguous. Iran was supposed to give its final response to the deal that was offered to it by the negotiating 5+1. Iran has submitted their response. We still don't know, but my guess is that they haven't accepted the deal, at least not all of it. And Europeans and the United States had said this is take it or leave it. So whether Europe and the United States will renegotiate or whether Iran will accept, we don't know. But there is a lot of evidence from inside Iran, from sites very close to Mr. Khamenei, that they're not going to accept the deal.
Well, given these developments, what needs to happen, if anything can happen, to quell tensions between the U.S. and Iran?
Well, I think we have to recognize that there is no military solution to this. I think the Iranian regime is banking on this, but the Iranian regime cannot survive on its own. And unless the international community makes it very clear to Iran that these kinds of actions, whether it is lying on its nuclear program or sending terrorists to kill American officials or Iranian journalists, or British writers stops, then the international community is going to bring more pressure on Iran to stop these kinds of shenanigans. Unless this kind of pressure is brought, this regime will continue doing this. They began this kind of a terrorist activity, this kind of taking hostages by taking American diplomats hostage. And when they saw the international community do virtually nothing other than put sanctions and make concessions to the Iranian regime and try to make deals with the Iranian regime, they just have learned a very bad habit. Now they have to be walked away from that bad habit unless the West wants to continue seeing these kinds of egregious behavior by a regime that literally knows no laws when it comes to its own people and increasingly to citizens dual in the West, dual Iranian, European, Iranian, American citizens.
Abbas Milani, Director of Iranian Studies at Stanford, we thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure.